Welcome everyone to today's webcast, Annual Planning. Didn't we just do this last year? My name is Ben Chamberlain. I'm the Chief Product Officer here at UMT360. Now for many of us on the traditional kind of calendar year, it is that time of year again where we look to put the brakes on and go through the analysis in terms of what investments we may choose or select for 2018. In today's webcast, we're really going to look at how a PMO can mature their top-down planning processes to more effectively align execution with strategy. We're going to spend particular reference today, looking at the high level. We're not going to get too deep into any of these, but looking at the high level in three investment planning techniques: project-driven, program-driven, capability-driven. We'll also look at switching from that kind of annual planning cadence into more of the processes required for multi-year planning, as well as that all-important continuous replanning event, something we call dynamic planning. So before we jump into the presentation today, we will pause at the end of today's session for a Q&A. Please post any questions you have to the GoToWebinar Q&A manager, and we'll get back to them at the end of today's session. So let's jump in. For those of you that attended our webinar series, this will not be a new slide for you. No, the way we see it is traditional PPM is broken. It's really failing to deliver on the promise, on its intended promise. Now, I think the stats on the right-hand side here are fairly well understood, whether it's Standish Group saying 18% of projects fail to get implemented, 43% of projects come late or over budget, Gartner saying that 33% of projects experience significant cost overruns, and even the PMI saying that 33% of projects do not deliver on their intended benefits or goals. Now, we've done a lot of research in this subject, and what our analysis shows is, based on the current state of play of PPM today, and this is more execution-orientated, tactical-orientated PPM, organizations are at risk of losing around 46% of the planned business value or benefits from their project and program investments. Easy to throw those numbers out there, but these are some of the contributing factors that are impacting that business value erosion. And let's think of this more from a top-down planning perspective or portfolio management perspective, as that's really the focus of today. So in inefficiency, a lot of organizations struggle just through to disconnected systems and too much manual and time-consuming data reconciliation, especially when it comes to building an annual plan, which can be a problem. We'll look at unreliable planning in some detail today, but one of the major issues is many organizations have suboptimal techniques for aligning execution or demand with strategy, and we'll certainly investigate that more. Also, many organizations still adopt that kind of set it and forget it approach. We go through that annual planning exercise, but then don't have the process throughout the year to replan as variables change. Lack of financial insights, big as well. Think about, and also poor resource utilization. Think about the impact on inaccurate cost and resource estimates early in the planning process. If cost and resource estimates are too high, what tends to happen is you end up drawing the line too early when looking at which projects can be selected, leave too much value on the table, and have to bring in more investments throughout the year. Conversely, if they're too low, you're going to bring more projects into the executed portfolio and have to start cutting them as cost overruns and other things occur during the year, resulting in value erosion. Forecasting is a big problem too, and cost overruns. Obviously, Gartner said that 33% of projects experience significant cost overruns. As projects start to slip through the execution year, something has to give. The portfolio budget is finite, so you're going to have to start de-scoping, cutting projects, which is going to result in a loss in business value. Forecasting capabilities in the organization is also weak. Budget utilization tends to be a big problem with too much money being left on the table at the end of the year. How do we get more effective at forecasting cost and resources and better utilizing all funds and resources through the year? That's another area we'll look at today. Disconnected portfolios. One of the models we'll look at today is all about integrating all investment portfolios so you have 360 view across your business, be able to quickly understand the impact of any investment, identify redundant investments, and make more orchestrated business decisions. Now, we can spend a lot more time on this slide, but these are some of the things that we'll look at how we can address leveraging different techniques. At UMT360, we spent a lot of time working in project and, more importantly, portfolio management. We built a framework, something we call the VIC framework, which is really being designed to take a PMO on a journey from where they often are today, which is some sort of form of tactical execution across their project portfolio, into a function that can really start to orchestrate business transformation. 3 steps in this model: visibility, insight, and connect. Visibility is about how do you quickly get the foundational controls you need to get visibility across your projects. The portfolio model is really project-centric at this stage. In insight, the portfolio model expands to include projects and programs, and we start to treat these as business investments and start to garner both the financial and strategic insights needed to support quicker, better, faster decisions. And in Connect, it's a simple recognition of the fact that these projects and programs don't exist in a vacuum, that we fund them to make a transformational change to something else in our organization, onboard or launch a new application, make a change to a business process or capability, enhance a product, whatever it may be. We have to understand these cross-portfolio dependencies and in turn start to apply portfolio management thinking and techniques to the management of other enterprise portfolios. And in doing so, we then build a kind of full blueprint of the whole operating fabric of our business and start to more effectively orchestrate both operational activity and spend and discretionary activity and spend. Now, as we drill down to level 2 in this model, we'll see how the core PPM capabilities incrementally build across the steps of visibility, insight, and connect. And the team at UMT360 are experts in understanding where you are today in terms of your current state of your PPM process relative to the VIC model, and then figuring out your future state and building roadmaps to get you there. Now, we have a very strong opinion in terms of what we expect organizations to be doing at each step in the process for each of these capabilities. Now, it's not my intention today to talk about any other capability other than portfolio management. So let's just drill down and look at portfolio management. Portfolio management, obviously a discipline that really helps us at the highest level to align execution with strategy. Now, when we look at how things are broken down across visibility, insight, and connect here, we're actually going to see 3 different what we call investment techniques or investment approaches that we're going to look at today. Project-driven, which aligns with visibility, which is more suitable to kind of annual planning exercises. Program-driven, lines of insight. We also see people moving from annual planning to more of a continuous or dynamic planning model as they move into insight, into the kind of holy grail of capability-driven planning approaches in Connect as our enterprise portfolio model grows beyond projects and programs. So when we think about the presentation today, we're going to lightly touch on some of the salient parts of each of these planning techniques or approaches: project-driven, program-driven, capability-driven, and time permitting, take a look at a dynamic planning process as well. So, as said, at 100,000 foot, there are 3 main investment approaches. And we actually added a 4th here because there is a 4th, which we're calling panic-driven. Now, the truth is there's a step up in maturity as you move left to right here, from panic-driven all the way through to capability-driven. So if we just touch on these lightly, panic-driven is kind of that no process, right? First come, first serve, the squeaky wheel gets the funding, whatever you want to say. There is a limited process available to objectively align anything with strategy. As we move into a project-driven investment approach, it's one where strategy is often defined and prioritized by the executive team, but often in a silo. And then when we hit often that annual planning cadence, that time of the year where many of you are at today, project requests get captured across the business to an impact assessment into strategy, as well as other information relevant to a business case, and then use semi-sophisticated techniques to optimize that portfolio under limited cost and resource constraints and recommend a portfolio that optimally aligns with the strategy. Now, we actually were one of the companies that founded this approach back in the early 2000s. Back then, we thought of it as a top-down planning technique. The truth is, it isn't. It's more bottom-up in nature, because strategy is often defined and prioritized in a silo. Project requests are captured across the business, disconnected from the strategy. Strategy is used to help to sort of sift through the different project requests and recommend the optimal portfolio. But the truth is, you're never quite sure whether you started out with the right demands. You definitely know you selected the best of whatever was teed up, but did you really identify demand in the first place that was best aligned with the strategy? At the highest level, program-driven, capability-driven look to overcome that one frailty. Program-driven with a more systematic approach of decomposition of strategy into key investment programs into the underlying execution, be that traditional or hybrid way of working, traditional and agile execution. The key here is programs are investment entities in their own right. They're things that are funded, they're things that are living, breathing entities in their own, and they act as a natural bridge between strategy and projects or the underlying execution. So it's fair to say that the underlying execution is aligned with the strategy because it was really developed top-down. We'll look more at that approach a little later. As we move into capability-driven, this really is a framework that answers Gartner's mandate in terms of digitalization and business transformation. Real core change is the introduction of business capabilities. The core operating functions of your business, the ability to analyze strategy into capabilities, the ability to make investment decisions in terms of projects and programs based on what improvements you want to make to the business capabilities in support of the strategy. In addition, you can further decompose your enterprise portfolio model, and this is a simple example here where we sort of break down capabilities by applications technology. We're going to get deeper into this, but these at the highest level are kind of the four different investment approaches. Well, we'll look at three of these. We're not going to take a look at panic-driven. But before we do that, the first poll, there are going to be two polls today, but the first poll of the day, which investment approach does your organization currently utilize? So project-driven, program-driven, capability-driven, or the first come, first serve, panic-driven. So another 10 seconds or so. Okay, let's publish the results. So this is pretty consistent with what we see. So here, 57% of us are in that project-driven investment approach, as I loosely described it. 31 are moving to that more of a top-down planning controls of program-driven, and 6% of us, actually two lots of 6%, so 12% in total, 6% on capability-driven, which is great. We'll talk more about that, and also 6% more in the panic-driven mode, which is good too. Okay, so let's jump back to the slides. So let's take a look at the project-driven investment approach in a little bit more detail. We already talked about it at the highest level based on the top right graphic here, but really it is a pretty systematic process that puts some objectivity into selecting the best project portfolio. It really takes the emotions out of the decision making. It starts with the definition of business strategy, which we'll take a look at in a little bit more detail in a second. Techniques to objectively prioritize that strategy, and the ability then to set departmental budgets. Now, as project requests, as already discussed, get captured, sort of bottom up across the organization, and capture the project demand, build out business cases, a part of that business case, prioritize the project request by impacting into the prioritized set of business drivers, and then use sophisticated or semi-sophisticated techniques to optimize and recommend the optimal portfolio, run capacity planning analysis before committing the portfolio for that upcoming planning period. So I think the process at a high level is relatively well understood, and hopefully that aligns with what many of you are doing from the 57% that we're looking at project driven. Let's take a look at some of the salient components of this. One of the key things I think in PPM, to me at least, is step 1 and 2 in here, defining and prioritizing business strategy and doing that right, because any planning process is garbage in, garbage out unless you're getting good strategic information into the system, well thought out business drivers, as well as solid information like cost information, benefit information from the investment request. So defining business strategy is important. So many things to consider here. So often you can garner the sort of high-level objectives of a business by looking at annual reports, marketing statements, mission statements of the organizations, but often they're at too high level to use in assessing a portfolio. So you've got to drill down to more actionable, measurable, and unique business drivers. Now, business drivers will be named a variety of things, but often are going to cover revenue growth, cost reduction, efficiency savings, quality risk, compliance mandates, and softer things around customer sat, employee satisfaction. Generally, when we define strategy of organizations, there's always a couple of drivers that fit in one or all of these buckets. There should be also not just a 12-month focus, a 3 to 5 year focus. Now, when we think about actionable and measurable business drivers, it should be anywhere between kind of 6 to 12. Fewer than 6, like I said, they're more like objectives, too high level. More than 12, there's normally too much functional overlap between these drivers. But probably one of the key points here is measurable. If we can measure a business driver, obviously we need to be able to apply and assign a KPI to it. And what's important here in terms of the project-driven planning approach is to make these business drivers measurable and then use those KPIs to build project impact statements. Impact statements that are going to be used objectively to assess the contribution that an investment will have on one or more of the business strategies. You see examples here on the right-hand side. A business driver on revenue, expanding new market segments. In fact, the KPI is revenue. And what's considered an extreme impact from a project perspective all the way down to a low impact based on the amount of revenue it will be delivered. Remember I said one of the key benefits of this approach is removing the emotion and making this more of an objective decision-making process. Now, many tools out there help you to house business strategy. Few, and this is actually screenshots from the Microsoft PPM solution, help you objectively prioritize that business strategy. So you've got a couple of ways you can do this. One, you can sit down with the execs and you can say, the top business driver here is 30% of the weighting, and can do it in a kind of arbitrary manner. What we recommend is leveraging a pairwise comparison technique. The pairwise comparison technique really allows you to compare each business driver pairing and ask a pretty simple question. Is business driver A more or less important than business driver B for the upcoming planning period? You see examples of that here. Expanding your markets and segments is more important than improved customer satisfaction. It's much more important than improved employee satisfaction. So going out to the key stakeholders and saying, which, CIO, COO, whoever it may be, and getting their business driver priorities by completing this pairwise comparison is an interesting thing. But ultimately, you want to drive consensus. And the real benefit here is getting the key stakeholders of an organization together and conducting this business driver prioritization session using the pairwise comparison technique. And it really is the open discussion around the relative importance of each business driver that is important. And here you can see the output is a prioritized set of business drivers. 33% of the weighting top business driver here, 3% of the weighting to the lowest business driver, improve employee satisfaction. Now this relative score is important. First, I can instantly tell my top business driver is around 10 to 11 times more important than my bottom, 33 versus 3%. The second is now I have a relative scale that allows me to assess investment alignment with strategy. So if I had $100 to invest in my strategy and I wanted to ensure total alignment, I would stick 33 on the top and $3 on the bottom. But as I say, key steps of defining and prioritizing strategy and really eliciting feedback from the executive team in terms of what is the strategy, what is the priority of that strategy, and using that as one way to analyze and recommend investments. So moving on, the all-important consolidation and prioritization of project requests. So the first thing is in a project-driven model, a lot of the governance, if not all the governance, is applied at the project level. So you're going to have a workflow, an example workflow here that spans the entire life of the investment from ideation, create, into portfolio selection, select, into detailed planning, execution, even goes beyond the life of the project into beneficiarization and other post-life activities. But the important thing is that the governance here is standardized at the project level. Next, one of the key benefits of introducing any system is to consolidate that demand. Remember, I talked about one of the things in terms of causes of hemorrhaging value is inefficiency of too much disconnected systems and processes and manual intervention. Just simply bringing all the information into a single repository that's able to make that governable, instantly reportable, and help you run analysis really can help you streamline that annual planning or any planning activity. So important here is to standardize that intake, standardize business case templates, which are going to include all information that you need: description, cost benefit analysis, different assessment metrics, high-level milestone, schedule information, resource plans, and a whole host of other information. Going back to the strategy, the important thing here is to use those impact assessments to do an impact assessment of how each project will contribute to the success of each business driver. And you see that form on the right-hand side here. We're able to automatically derive a strategic value score, prioritize the portfolio from a value perspective. We'll also see how we can start to leverage, later in this presentation, yield scores. Strategic yield, which is value divided by cost, and can be used throughout the project's life and portfolio's life as an investment viability indicator. So not rocket science here, but simply consolidating requests, standardizing governance at the project level, and generating those assessment scores, including strategic value. Now, as we move into optimize and select the highest value portfolio, it's where we can start to use 0-1 or linear optimization techniques. And this is actually leveraging strategic yield. And the thing here is the projects are going to be prioritized by their value, and it's a sort of value cost assessment, which basically means projects almost get stack ranked by their yield, value over cost, and then you draw a line, right? So it's 0-1, meaning that a project's either going to be included or excluded from the portfolio. So using linear optimization algorithms to help to optimize the portfolio under different budget constraints. If I change the visual here, as you see a screenshot from the Microsoft PPM solution, which allows it's an optimization tool set, allowing you to run different what-if analysis under different budget constraints, leverage efficient front-end modeling to identify the portfolio, the highest value portfolio under different cost constraints. The algorithms are going to factor things that almost the human brain can't consider, things like bringing in interdependencies and other aspects that you need to consider, or instantly understanding the impact of trade-offs. What happens if I force in a project because it's a pet project or it's a compliance mandate, whatever it may be, what's the corresponding impact on the portfolio? Now remember, one of the key benefits here again is we've been bringing projects in based on the prioritization on strategic value and using that as a way of objectively making decisions with tool sets like this, so removing the emotion from. Now I know I just did a whistle-top tour through project-driven investment approach, and hopefully that aligns with how many of you are doing it today. But what are some of the relative pros and cons of this approach? And we've touched on some of this already. Definite pro is often you're going to want to consolidate and bring everything into a central repository, so all requests are in one place, everything becomes governable and reportable. I talked about business strategy, both definition and prioritization, but to me it's actively engaging the executive team to ask them what their priorities are, and then using that as a guiding light in terms of investment decision making, and then reporting back in those terms back to the team. Now, the strategic yield score, which we'll talk more about, value over cost, is key. It helps us to maximize investment and align investment with strategy. We'll also see a little later how it can be used as an investment viability indicator through the life of the project, so we're just not using it as a one-time score in terms of project selection. Now, It is a good technique for assessing discretionary investments, not really great at considering operational activity and spend, and is better suited to that kind of annual planning paradigm of we've got a portfolio, X amount of budget left, which one should we bring in for the next year? From a con perspective, I think we touched on this already. It is more bottom up in nature. We're not generating the demand from the strategy. We're more using strategy as a way to pick the best demand that was teed up. Now, from a funding perspective, it tends to be the funds are given to business units. The larger business units, by virtue of revenue or size or whatever it may be, get more of the funds. Doesn't mean necessarily that the most strategic investments are actually contained within those business units. Not optimal for multi-year planning. Why I say that is that value cost paradigm. Normally you're looking at the total value based on the total cost of the project. If that project spans multiple years, it's difficult to apportion out a portion of that value and a portion of that cost. So it's better suited for that kind of annual planning cadence. Strategy, we don't get too deep into that, but often when using this approach, organizations are more focused on just kind of enterprise drivers versus really decomposing drivers down into departmental or a more granular level like we may see in the program-driven approach. Okay, so we touched lightly there on project-driven. Again, we're going to move to the program-driven investment approach too. Now, it's not my intention, again, for program-driven or capability-driven to get right down into the weeds here. I just want to surface some of the things you should consider when moving to, or for those of you that are already doing it, when improving your program-driven investment approach. So, when we think about the program-driven investment approach, we talked about it earlier, right? That at the highest level, it starts with the decomposition of strategy into actionable investments, in this case programs, before it's decomposed down into the underlying execution or projects themselves. And programs being living, breathing investment entities themselves versus just reporting veneer on top of projects. So the process is pretty simple. So again, it starts with the definition and prioritization of business strategy. But as you start to decompose this strategy, actually then defining key investment programs within a business unit across business units, across the enterprise, it doesn't matter. But starting with the program itself, looking at techniques to allocate funds to programs, and then decomposing those programs down into the underlying execution or projects, and approving the projects based on the funds that have been allocated to the programs themselves before you get into capacity planning analysis, committing the portfolio. I'm not really going to touch on capacity planning analysis in this, but just wanted to include it. Obviously, it's a key step in the planning process. So, this example of program-driven investment approach. Now, I think one of the first things to acknowledge here is programs can mean different things to different people. In fact, the way I think of this investment approach, it's actually kind of just a generic approach that many other standardized approaches utilize the construct today. When you think even things like balanced scorecard, it's a systematic decomposition of investments from strategy. Hoshin planning, Gartner execution methodology, GEM from the Gartner team. Even the construct of some of the more agile portfolio techniques like SAFE follows this sort of systematic decomposition at different levels from strategy down to programs to the underlying execution. But programs may be called different things in any one of those methodologies. So let's try not to get lost on the vernacular here. I'm more talking about the organization of information. So again, the key here is that the decomposition from those key objectives or drivers into sort of lower granular, more granular strategies, and then down into those programs themselves. Again, I just want to reinforce, because I don't have a slide on this, but I want to reinforce the importance of programs being individual investment entities in their own right. They exist often before projects get created, and they house top-down information such as budget, resource plans, assessment information, whatever it may be at the program level, as well as dynamically aggregating the similar information, cost, resource information, etc., from the underlying projects. So you're able to do both top-down and bottom-up planning at the program level. You're also able to look at reallocating funds throughout the year at the program level, because we're maintaining top-down planning information at the program level, as well as seamlessly integrating with the underlying execution. Again, I don't have a slide that drills into the data that should be captured at the program level. I think that's pretty well understood, but it is important to note that these investment programs are individual investment entities in their own right. They are governed independent of, but explicitly integrated with the underlying execution. Now, the other example here is that it is a good construct to provide a hub across different execution techniques. You may have more of a sort of agile-based structure, like here, portfolio strategy into portfolio epic, into program epic, cascading down into an agile system. Now, again, the vernacular can change: strategic epic, portfolio epic, program epic. It doesn't matter, but the constructs are going to be the same. You may have programs just sitting on traditional execution, waterfall execution, as shown as program 1 here. You may have other programs that are looking at hybrid approaches, right? Waterfall approaches with development tasks being executed in an agile manner. It also allows you to aggregate information such as non-project activity, operational activity and spend back to the program level too. So you can start to consolidate that and get a view of a more effective view of that, too. So I think one of the key challenges here is standardizing the concept of a program, right? Moving from project-driven to program-driven, it really means about standardizing that concept of a program. Which often is difficult because you've got to start to build that program structure on top of already your project-driven structure. Can't tell you how many times I go to a customer, and you look at their project list and there's, totaling $100 million. You've got 80 projects totaling $50 million and one project totaling the balance, the other 50 million, right? So how do we start to raise that to the program level, but also start to group all other investments by program? So introducing that program structure can be a challenge. When we start to look at the program-driven model, maybe you're looking at different funding techniques. You can apply linear optimization the way that I described it earlier, but it is better suited to the projects. Often you're looking more at a proportional optimization. It's not if I do a program, it's how important is that program and how much of the relative investment should it get. So you may, for a given year, fund all programs or most programs, but to a given percentage versus all their requests, and then figure out at the project level, what can be done for that. So in this case, more of a proportional optimization technique versus that linear 0-1 optimization technique. Now, you can defer programs, obviously, in the roadmap for future years. Now, another problem when moving from project-driven to program-driven is reorchestrating or refactoring your governance controls. As I said earlier on, that project-driven investment approach, the governance naturally is at the project level, all the way through from ideation, funding, planning, execution. But as we start to introduce the concept of programs as living, breathing investment entities, we can start to move a lot of the funding controls, or the upfront funding controls, to the program level. So programs are generated in that strategy allocate phase. The funding is allocated to those programs. At that point, we know what funding that program's getting, and we can now start to break down the underlying projects, regardless of the execution discipline. I've just got Agile and Waterfall as an example here. It could be back of the napkin stuff as well, managed in Smartsheet and other things. But now we don't need such a full workflow at the project level. Really, it's just a matter of raising the projects, approving based on the program funds, and getting into execution rather than having to go through multiple gates to seek project approval. So I do see organizations struggling when moving to program driven for two reasons. One, introducing the program construct consistently across the organization, and two, refactoring the governance controls to up level to the program level for all upfront investment decisions and reallocation decisions, and really lightening at the project level in terms of just quick funding and straight into execution as we see here. So we're touching on a lot of concepts at a high level here. But as one of the weaknesses we talked about project driven was maybe not being well suited to multi-year planning. Now the program construct helps us here. So how do we start to maintain a rolling wave plan? That can be any duration you want. The example here is 3 to 5 years. I've got a 4-year plan here. So the benefit here is you can define the time period that you want to be detailed. In this case, I've got an example. There's a 2018. We're looking at a more detailed planning horizon for that year, where we have programs broken down by the underlying execution. And during that 12 months, we have both the top-down cost, resource plan, and other information at the program level, but we also have the bottom-up information coming from the underlying execution. So we're far more detailed at that level. Now, as we move into out years, however member that would be, in this case we've got 2019 being planned in a quarterly level, and the out years 2020 and 2021 being yearly. So again, we have all that top-down information at the program level, top-down cost, top-down resource plans, so we can just maintain it at that level. And as we move into 12 months out, so when we're in April, as we're going to start to be in a monthly granularity in Q1 of 2019 and start to build out the underlying execution there too. So that natural construct of being able to maintain top-down information at the program level as well as integrate the bottom-up information at project level lends well to building more of a rolling wave strategic plan. Now, of course, other benefits of roadmaps, which going outside of the context of this presentation a bit, but the ability to understand dependencies and render those dependencies project to project, project to program, program to program, program to other portfolios, and generate these roadmaps automatically out of the system based on a variety of views. So pros and cons of the project-driven investment approach. The main pro, better systematic decomposition of the underlying execution from the strategy. Fairer funding technique, because funds are actually broken out by program based on their importance and back to the strategy versus just a bucket of money being given to a business unit. A good technique for actually abstracting across any form of execution, waterfall, agile, back of the napkin, and really providing a point where we can harmonize all investments and replan throughout the year. Better technique for multi-year planning, as we discussed, as well as a better way of really consolidating and viewing both operational activity and spend and discretionary activity and spend. We talked about the challenges, so I won't go there. The idea of standardizing what a program is across the enterprise or across business units, as well as refactoring of governance controls. Nothing that stops you doing it, but those things that have to be considered. So moving on to the capability driven investment approach. And again, probably going to touch on this the lightest, because this is the most mature of the planning planning frameworks. So, the introduction of business capabilities and other enterprise portfolios that you'll need to manage if you want to orchestrate business transformation across an organization. Again, this is maybe an oversimplification of the process, but again, the importance of the definition and prioritization of strategy. The introduction of a business capability, we'll talk more about that. The ability to map capabilities into strategy, the ability to then make decisions in terms of what investments you need to make based on the core capabilities in our business. And then we're into that program-driven or potentially even project-driven investment approach, decomposing into key investment programs, projects, and executing in the manner that we've already discussed. So let's look at some of the things here. Defining a capability model is key. It's kind of contingent on moving to a capability planning approach. And again, a lot of confusion here. What are business capabilities? What are things to consider when defining business capabilities? At their core, the business capability is really the operating fabric or functions of our business. It represents what the company does at its core. When you think about a capability, it really is a roll-up of people, process, and underlying technology that is automating that capability. You know, and you think about when Gartner talks about digitalization or business transformation, it's what we're doing to improve the core operating model, the core business capabilities to make us more efficient or make us more competitive and more agile. And it really is, you know, a discussion of how to improve these core business capabilities to deliver performance to the business. When you think about defining an enterprise capability model, it's really, you know, hierarchical, 3 to 4 levels deep. You're really focusing on what the business does rather than how it does it. As you actually break down capabilities into the how, that's where you reach the sort of underlying processes, and you're now getting into the world of more detailed enterprise architecture, and that's not the intention at this stage. And I'll let you read the rest. But the ability really to define that hierarchical capability model that really defines the core operating fabric of your business. The other key part of the capability-driven investment approach, and why we have it placed in the Connect portion of our VIC framework, is that the enterprise portfolio model expands to include other enterprise portfolios that you need to manage to fully orchestrate business transformation, discretionary activity and spend, as well as operational activity and spend. So to be able, you know, the ability to define additional portfolios, like breaking capabilities down into the technology components, applications and technology that are automating those business capabilities, or introducing any other enterprise portfolio that you need to manage to orchestrate in investments. Now, when we think about enterprise portfolio management, really it is a discipline of understanding cross-project, program, and portfolio relationships and dependencies. And there's 3 key types of dependencies, relationships that you really have to understand. The first is functional, which is more pseudo-enterprise architecture, how things fit together. A program impacts a capability. It also ties to a strategy. A project can be updating an app which ties to a capability that's impacting a strategy. So everything is tied together. And that's one of the biggest challenges we see with organizations out there today, how to abstract across all investment portfolios or enterprise portfolios to start to more effectively improve decision making and orchestrate business transformation, and, you know, get a view across operational and discretionary activities. So financial, the next one. You can then, how money and resources flows through that model. So the cost of an application, the cost of capability can be derived from the entities beneath it. And also roadmap, and we touched on that, or time-based. Ability now to be able to, at a click of a button, understand the cross-portfolio impact of any investment. So if this project is delayed, it's going to impact this app, it's going to impact this capability or this product, however you orchestrate. So being able to very quickly see the cause and effect of decisions across portfolios that are often siloed and managed by different people. Another thing I like about this model, and I've had one of our companies we're working with refer to it this way, is as ensuring that the execution, however we organize that, projects and programs, are architecturally bound. Being able at any time to understand what those investments are impacting, programs to capabilities, projects to applications, whatever the model assesses, which allows us really to do many things, like do a better job of identifying redundant investments. If I have projects teed up to make a change to the same app or the same capability, that's going to be a red flag. If I have an investment request to improve an app that's scheduled to be retired, that's a red flag, right? I mean, you start to see the 6 degrees of separation and spot very quickly red flags or redundant investment requests, because you have that full picture of your business. And like I say, a lot of talk in the industry around digitalization, business transformation, and other things. No, but they will remain buzzwords unless we really look to adopt a practical framework, a practical approach to being able to orchestrate all investment decisions. I know I'm at about 100,000 foot in my discussion of this today, but the capability-driven investment framework is a great framework of abstracting across and bringing everything together so that you can orchestrate all enterprise investments in terms of improving the core capabilities of your business and delivering on the key strategies that have been defined. So a slide of this in action and why this does provide a clear line of sight from strategy through to execution. So in this case, we may have some strategy. This is an example from an insurance company. So maybe we're focusing on a key strategy to reduce loss ratio by settling claims more quickly. Well, as we now have the ability, through the framework I discussed, to understand what are the core capabilities, business capabilities that will help us do that, right? And there's managed claims. So we start to mine the claims capability down to level 2, 3, 4, whatever it may be. We're starting to see two key capabilities we may want to further invest: process and investigate claims, and settle claims. Well, in turn, we can assess the performance of those capabilities, but again, in this example, we may want to drill down and understand what are the applications or other things that are automating those capabilities, and should we be looking to make any changes to the app on claim notification, on claim processing, and then with all that information, start to generate initiatives, programs, projects, whatever way we're doing this, to make those improvements. Program and claim service workflow, and a program, the claims at the accident scene, relating back to those apps which tie to those capabilities, which inexplicably tie back to the strategy. So you can very quickly see how we can get a clear line of sight, from the strategy all the way through to the underlying execution. Now, of course, this is a simple representation of this problem. And, one of the key challenges in moving to the capability framework is not just about introducing the concept of business capabilities. That can be done relatively simply, but it is actually now abstracting across the other systems of record you need to bring everything together at the right level of detail. So financial systems, CMDB or whatever it may be to get application and technology information, PPM systems, and the list goes on. But that is the key challenge that we see today in moving to the capability-driven framework, is being able to get more transparency by integrating all relevant enterprise portfolios, so you can see the cause and effect of any investment decision and effectively orchestrate business transformation. Now, again, I'm just touching on capability-driven at a very high level, but often when I present this, we talk about project-driven, program-driven, capability-driven as kind of either-or, and the step up in maturity is as you evolve your top-down planning processes. The truth is that the capability-driven investment approach is actually a superset of them all. It's the best of all worlds. It is a framework that allows you to decompose and generate execution, or generate the demand or execution from the top down, strategy to programs to projects. It includes that framework of program driven. Now, regardless of what I tell you in these kind of webcasts, yes, we are going to do a better job at trying to build multi-year plans, generate the demand that optimally aligns with the business strategy ahead of time, but we're never going to get away from that bottom-up demand coming in any time. So it does provide a technique as well to deal with that bottom-up demand, that project-driven investment approach that can come in annually or can come in throughout the year, and how we triage that. Okay, again, how we quickly assess the relevance of that investment, is it redundant, and make decisions on it. So capability-driven investment approach is something we are all maturing to, but is also, we're able to use project-driven and program-driven as a building block to get there, because these are core concepts that are still relevant when you're in the capability-driven investment approach. So with this in mind, pros and cons of this approach. So I've talked a lot about this already, so I'll just let you kind of cast your eye down here. It is the most comprehensive approach for orchestrating transformation. It's the superset. Funding is can be done still at the program level, but often is now allocated at the capability level. Really, the cons are what I mentioned. I mean, it is getting consensus to and definition around what is your capability portfolio, and then dealing with how to bring all relevant portfolios together and abstract so you have that visibility and transparency across portfolios to support investment decisions. Difficult to do, unless you're using tools like UMT360 to help you do that. So it's a bit of a shameless plug there. So final poll: which investment approach would you say your organization is moving to in the future? So I think we were like 57% project driven, 30% and change program driven, 6 and 6 on the panic driven, and the other one. So project driven, program driven, capability driven, and we're staying in panic driven, which let's see how that comes up. Okay, I think we can close the polls. It's very encouraging. So 54% of us moving to capability driven, 23% either staying or moving to program driven. Obviously the number for project driven has significantly fallen. And actually we've increased in terms of people staying in panic mode from 6% to 8%. That's, we'll consider that an anomaly, or a few people dropped off. So not a huge amount of time left, but to quickly touch on agile and dynamic planning. Now, we talked a bit about how program-driven can support better multi-year rolling wave planning. I'm not going to go there. Let's talk more about, regardless of your annual planning or project-driven or multi-year planning process, you're still going to want to rebalance the portfolio on a continuous cadence. Could be because variables change, could be just want to do it monthly or quarterly. Let's talk about a quick process to do. Strategic yield is a key concept here for what we call dynamic planning. Again, it's that value divided by cost. It's that metric that we're able to use to calculate the bang for the buck for projects or programs. It's actually a strong metric being used to assess not just pending projects, but also in-flight projects. It frustrates me a little bit why yield and value is not used for assessment in flight portfolios. You normally revert back to financial metrics. We can actually use it throughout the life of the project as an investment viability indicator. If the cost of the project increases and the value stays the same, value over cost, the yield will fall, and it'll act as an immediate kind of investment viability indicator that we can have at the project and program level, but could also be aggregated at the portfolio level too. Now, the dynamic planning process is a very simple process. It's one where we want to capture enough information to allow us to make investment decisions on the cadence of your choosing, monthly or quarterly, and rebalance the portfolio. We start the year with the original budget and headcount information, and then we start to execute, and things invariably start to change. Obviously, cost estimates and things can often be inaccurate, resulting in cost overruns, or even people needing to give money back. So how do we substantiate a process here that allows people to give back money, give back resources when they don't need them? Releases, which are instantly received and accepted. But obviously, many projects are going to need more people, money, as time goes on. So a process to request more people and money to complete a project. But rather than just approving that, assessing that against net new projects coming in. How do we ensure that we're continuously managing the most optimal portfolio from a value attainment point of view? So the ability to accept releases and then analyze incremental funding requests and resource requests against new projects, and that results in, on a monthly or quarterly basis, a revised portfolio that you're sure is maximizing the overall value. Again, an easy process, one that is difficult to automate. When you look at some of the dynamic planning reports and metrics that couldn't be garnered here, really it is a discipline as shown here of looking to optimize spend and resources while maximizing the overall value from the portfolio. And from a PMO perspective, whether it's monthly, quarterly, looking to rebalance that portfolio and understand the impact that you're having on the portfolio. How do I make sure that I'm maximizing my overall budget and resource utilization while driving the optimal yield from the portfolio? So we can measure this at each period, month, quarter, and understand the impact we're having. How much funds released, how many new projects I bring in, how much money was redirected, what was the impact on the value, yield, and budget utilization. Because it's obviously easy to spend money, throw more money at the problem. It's a lot harder to continue to optimize the value or yield. Now, one of the things about dynamic planning is everyone wants to do it, but it's less about the process and the tool sets that enable this and more about the cultural change as it pertains to forecasting. Because without a strong forecasting discipline in your organization, dynamic planning becomes an exercise in futility. The first thing obviously is to train project managers in better forecasting. You know, many project managers are going to hold on to funds for a rainy day in case they need it. But that has a massive impact, right? At the end of the year, if everyone does that, you're not going to spend all the available funds. Often in Q4, people are notified too late. The PMO realizes there's spare funds. It's too little time to reinvest and drive the value within that given planning period. So PMs must really start to adopt that portfolio mindset of holding on to resources and money that they don't need is actually impacting, or has potentially impacting the generation of portfolio value. You've got to look at the reasons why PMs do that. It's not often just because they're storing money for a rainy day. It's often because a lot of the executives in the organization tend to, celebrate when a project comes in under budget, but also, tend to beat people up if a project comes $1 over budget. And the truth is, and one CFO told me once, there's no such thing as a good surprise. Under or over is equally bad. And that's the truth, right? Because executives need to be taught that if all projects are coming in under budget again, that is impacting our portfolio value. We are not freeing up funds early enough or people early enough to recommit them and reinvest them in other value-driven work. So it's not just a PM training problem. It's probably you need to start with the executives and ensure that that is culturally understood. So running a little bit hot on time today, so again we touched on a lot of subjects that are kind of 50,000 foot there. So hopefully we have a good understanding of some of the constructs and differences between project, program, and capability driven. We can certainly go deeper in each one of those approaches in future webcasts. Now, in terms of next steps, you want to learn more about those approaches or anything that we do, please visit UMT360.com. You will get a link to potentially undertaking a PPM assessment. So one way you can engage us is let us do an assessment in terms of where you are today in your planning approaches and where you might go tomorrow and how to plot a path to get there. So again, I know we're almost at the top of the hour, so if you have to run, please feel free to do so. But we will pause now and look at any questions that were posted in the Q&A and wrap up with the Q&A. Would it be reasonable to consider the service-driven approach similar to a program-driven approach? Yeah, I think yes, it would be reasonable to say that. As I say, the program-driven, I almost consider the program-driven approach as the equivalent of a generic drug, right? I mean, there's many other name brands out there that are doing exactly the same thing. So the methodologies I mentioned, balanced scorecard, Hoshin, GEM, SAFE, other things that adopt that similar construct. So yeah, any from strategy to key services through to the underlying execution, it's identical in its construct, and this is where vernacular becomes almost paralyzing when we're talking to business versus IT, different verticals, but the constructs are normally the same. But that's the key here of being able to build an enterprise portfolio model, capabilities, services, products, a business service versus an IT service. I mean, everything you often need 30 minutes at the start of any engagement or meeting, just to level set on the vernacular that people are using. So the question is, what do you recommend to manage the enterprise architecture model that shows relationships between strategy, capabilities, application, technology projects? What would you recommend? Well, I mean, you need an enterprise portfolio management solution, right? A tool that is capable of defining an enterprise portfolio model, and one that is then able to abstract across. Now, there are many enterprise architecture tools that specialize in heavyweight enterprise architecture, but do tie in capabilities applications, but then need to integrate with PPM systems. So, there are new wave of solutions, our product UMT360 included, that allow you to really establish that top-down model, integrate with the line of business systems, EA, PPM, finance, or whatever it may be, business architecture tools, and abstract. It is a matter still of not duplicating the data, and it's still going to be mastered in the system of record. In CMDB is another example, but pull it in and allow you now to model the impact of any investment decisions and build these roadmaps. A few more questions. I know we're up on time, so maybe I'll just take this last one. What percentage of organizations are using project program capability-driven PPM approach? That's a difficult thing to answer. I would say it's often there's more than 6% or 8%, whatever the final number was, that are still stuck in some form of organized chaos or panic-driven investment approach. It's more often or not that today I think the numbers were 57%, but the larger number today are project-driven, but have their eye on program-driven and capability-driven. I'm also getting a lot more now of we're actually all three, but not standardized on any, right? So there is a capability model at, even if it's a level 2 detail, they are generating top-down demand in that way. They are looking at the project-driven technique. So I would say that, and I forget exactly what the poll was. It was the second poll. In terms of moving to, so 54% were moving to the capability-driven approach, and I think we had 6% in there already. So, normally I see around 70 to 80% of the organizations we speak to week in, week out are moving to capability-driven, but acknowledging the fact that this is going to be a journey, right? This is not something that you switch on this year rather than doing project-driven. This is something that you're going to have to systematically build to, over the next 2 to 3 to 4 years, in terms of really standing up each portfolio that is your enterprise portfolio model, connecting them to provide that ability to see the 6 degrees of separation between everything and make investment decisions. But capability-driven is definitely the way people are moving, especially as Gartner and others talk more about the importance of business transformation, and companies like us, look to provide practical ways of doing exactly that. Okay, so we're over time. I want to thank you for attending today. Please look out for the next webcast in the series, which we'll be announcing soon, and have a good rest of the day.